Hello everybody, welcome to Blue Marble Science. Why is Nathan Oakley running from this diagram? Maybe it's because it can't work on a flat earth. Recently Nathan Oakley played one of my videos on Brian's logic, and the derp that ensued is hilarious. Warning, you're gonna need some oven mitts for this.
Hillbilly blue balls.
And of course no Oakley interaction is ever complete without an ad hom. Well, I'll tell you what, if you're Brian's logic, there are really no known limits. Warning, severe derp dead ahead. You guys hang on.
Hello, how are you doing? This is going to be a quick video on the truth of what is a nautical mile, because there's a lot of rubbish out there about them being connected to a globe earth, which is not true. Nothing to do with a globe earth whatsoever.
Actually,
He's full of shit.
yes, he is, isn't he? Brian, a nautical mile is 1/5400th of the distance from either pole to the equator. It's 1/21,600th of the circumference of the Earth at the equator.
Can I address that?
Please.
Yeah. Well, for a start, he's after begging the question of a globe. That's the obvious one. But secondly, he's just talking about longitude line.
That's not begging the question, Brian. We got millions of pictures of the damn thing from outer space. And a nautical mile is not just the distance along a meridian, it's the distance in any direction on the surface of the Earth. We'll get into that in a minute.
He's just talking about an actual land or physical distance, land and sea distance along a longitude line. That's what he's talking about on the latitude and longitude grid. I mean, that means nothing. There is 60 nautical miles per degree and 60 minutes per degree. And those minutes are translated, those minutes are measured in the sky, along the sky, as degrees and minutes, and they are then translated or transferred to the surface of the Earth as nautical miles.
No, Brian, a nautical mile is the distance along any great circle subtended by 1 minute of arc. That's what a nautical mile is by definition.
My question is, and I don't know if he's answered it in this video because no one else has been able to answer it, is my main question is, what is the origin and purpose of the nautical mile? Because so far he's just told us at the very start there, he spoke about them being a distance along the surface of the Earth. But what has that got to do with the origin and purpose?
You know, it's a little disturbing that you're even asking this question, Brian. You want to know what the purpose of a nautical mile is? It's a unit of measure. It simply defines a specific distance. Just like a foot. A foot was originally 1/3 the length of some king's arm. Why? Because the king said so. That's why. A statute mile was declared by English Parliament to be 8 furlongs, each furlong being 40 rods, and each rod being 16.5 feet long. That's 5,280 feet. A meter was defined as 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the pole to the equator. That's 1/4 meridian. And a nautical mile is the distance along a great circle that is subtended by 1 minute of arc. It is agreed to be 1,852 meters. That's about 6,076 feet.
The purpose is there's 60 of them per degree. So we measure degrees when we are looking at celestial objects. We measure in degrees and minutes of degrees and seconds of degrees, and they are then translated as a distance. So we use an elevation angle, which is 90-degree right angle. We use an elevation angle to a celestial object, and if we have a 40-degree angle for a celestial object above the horizon, then we know we have 50 degrees. That's 50 times 60 nautical, 50 times 60 nautical miles of a distance. So you're measuring a straight horizontal distance along the surface of the Earth, but you wouldn't have nautical miles. They wouldn't exist because there'd be no reason for them without minutes of degree. They just wouldn't exist.
In the days before we had radio aids to navigation like Loran and more recently GPS, navigation was done by reference to celestial objects. Since the late 1500s, men had known that the ratio of the distance across the surface to the angle from the horizon to a celestial body was a constant. In the early 1700s, sextants came about that were for the specific purpose of measuring the angle between two visible objects. That could be two celestial objects or a celestial object in the visible horizon. And later on, sextants were modified to include a bubble so that the horizon's no longer necessary. You can measure the angle from the local zenith to the celestial object, and the complement of that angle is the same as the elevation angle of that celestial object to the horizon. Now, because we like to use degrees, minutes, and seconds when we're measuring angles, it only made sense to divide 1 degree of elevation into 60 minutes, and to divide the distance along a great circle subtended by 1 minute of elevation change as a nautical mile. That's what Robert Hughes did in 1594, and it has remained that way ever since. What's important to note is that the distance subtended by 1 minute of arc is a constant. It does not change. That is a nautical mile, and you're going to see why that's important in just a minute.
Well, how are you doing? This is a follow-on from my earlier video about the nautical mile.
You know where Blue Marble's commentary is? Because otherwise we're just listening to you. No offence, Brian.
I don't. I didn't listen to the video. This is the problem. I didn't listen to the video. I was hoping to play it, and I was hoping he'd have Mohit to be saying more. But obviously, he's playing my videos, and he's kind of attacking them. But so far, I haven't heard anything from him. That so like this is it. You could even leave it at that. I don't like if it's not going to get any more exciting than that. But so far, I haven't heard any origin or purpose for the nautical mile. Like, why do we have nautical miles? What's the point of them? Do you know what I mean? We know the point of the statute miles, but why do we have nautical miles? Well, what seems to be the case is what they're doing on the globe side. All they've gotten is that a nautical mile is 1.151 times a statute mile, and that they can be converted into kilometers. It's like, who cares? What has that got to do with their origin and their purpose? They're only
a whopping 30,861 nautical miles. You guys can't explain this. But I got the perfect solution. Let the Earth be spherical. Let the light coming from Polaris be parallel at every point on Earth as we know it to be. Measure the angle to Polaris relative to our local zenith. And
Yeah, you're going to need a flat plane for that. Angle? Yeah, you need a flat plane. Can't have a curved adjacent. You want to speak to that, Brian?
wait a minute, Nathan. I never said anything about a flat plane. I never talked about a horizontal. Read number 3. Measure the angle to Polaris relative to our local zenith. There's no flat plane involved. There's no baseline that you guys yammer on and on about. This is an angle measured from the zenith to the celestial object. You do that with things like, a bubble sextant, for instance.
Not dead.
Yeah, you can't. To do what he's talking about is an elevation angle to Polaris. That requires a flat plane. You need a 90 degree angle. And if Polaris is 40 degree, as I said, just like earlier, if Polaris is 40 degrees above your local horizon, then that means it's 50 degrees of distance. Its GP is 50 degrees of distance, and you can only get that. You can only take that angle, and you can only get that distance, which is how they calculate the longitude lines. You can only get that by having a 90 degree right angle. You can't do it any other way. It needs a flat baseline, and that baseline, whether it be 1 minute of degree or 60 degrees from the GP of Polaris, it has to be straight, horizontal, and flat.
So yeah, without any effort, just scrolling through his video, he's starting to reference angles to Polaris. Well, you're going to need a flat Earth for that angle, Blue Marble, and clearly this doesn't address the housekeeping question. We're asking how you can have That angle measurement, effectively. The one you've just described in your video? Well, we're addressing it, Blue.
Well, first of all, Nathan, no, you're not addressing it. You're talking about a mythical baseline which you guys have just made up. That is not required, and it's not part of the process. You know as well as I do that for a 6-foot observer, the horizon normally is no more than about 3 nautical miles away from you. That means in order to see the GP of a celestial object, you would have to be literally directly under it. That's absolutely useless. But instead of that, let's talk about what happens on a flat Earth. There you would have this baseline that you talk about. So let's talk about Polaris. Now we know, and you guys agree, that each degree of latitude is equal to 60 nautical miles. The 45-degree latitude, therefore, would be 2,700 nautical miles from the GP. Because this is an isosceles right triangle, Polaris's altitude would have to be also 2,700 nautical miles. Now let's go to the triangle calculator. Let's look at 15 degrees, angle alpha. That would be equivalent to a 15-degree latitude. Let's input 2,700 miles as the altitude of Polaris, that's side A, and you see that the distance from the GP, which would be side B, is 10,077 miles. It's that line there. At 15 degrees latitude, the distance on a flat Earth to the pole would have to be 10,077 nautical miles. That's almost twice the measured distance to the equator. And it gets worse. Let's input 5 degrees for the latitude. In that case, the distance from the GP to the 5-degree latitude would be 30,861 nautical miles. I'll say that again. At 5 degrees, the distance to the pole would be a whopping 30,861 nautical miles. You guys have absolutely no explanation for this. But let's do something else. Let's try taking a road trip. Now I got this off Google Maps. Let's take a road trip from Pittsburgh to Miami, Florida. The distance by road is 1,181 statute miles. That's 1,026 nautical miles. Keep in mind the road is not straight and it's going up and down hills. So you expect that road distance is going to be a little different than a straight line true distance. Now let's look at the latitudes. Pittsburgh is at 40 degrees, 26 minutes. That's 40.43 degrees. Miami is at 25 degrees, 45 minutes. That's 25.75 degrees. If we take the difference in those two latitudes, times 60, we get 880.8 nautical miles. Now that's reasonably valid because the two longitudes are roughly the same. And I confirm that by measuring it on Google Earth to be 879.6 nautical miles, only about 1 nautical mile different. And the slight difference in longitude could account for that. So you got a big problem. There's Polaris at an altitude of 2,700 nautical miles. There's Pittsburgh at a latitude of 40.43 degrees. And by the way, that can easily be measured from the local zenith. As I said in my other video, there's no need to look at the horizon unless you just want to. So let's put the distance into the triangle calculator. 2,700 nautical mile altitude, a latitude of 40.43 degrees, and we get a distance from Pittsburgh to the GP of 3,169 nautical miles. Now let's put in Miami at a latitude of 25.75 degrees. Pull up the triangle calculator again. 2,700 nautical mile altitude for Polaris, 25.75 degrees latitude. The distance from Miami to the GP is 5,598 nautical miles. The distance from Pittsburgh to Miami, if the Earth is flat, has to be the difference between those two measurements. 5,598 minus 3,169 is 2,429 nautical miles. The actual driving distance is only 1,026 nautical miles. This is a massive flat Earth fail. Flat Earth falls apart right here. Now, I'd love to hear you guys explain this. Why don't you give it a try? In the meantime, hey, thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Ring the little bell if you want notifications. Shout out to the patrons and PayPals. I appreciate everything you guys do. And we'll see you on the next one.